Was this written
All right,
differently?
so let's begin with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. It is indeed an obligation to spend times wrestling with, delving with, and engaging in the words of Torah. Actually, la'asok, we have to engage in it. It doesn't actually say we ever have to understand it or fully know it. We always have to engage with it.
La'asot.
So I just want to, before we get into anything else, I want to give you a little what's going on here. And we get the hint to that from our little line in black at the end of this whole blessing that bridges from the story in red to the closing of the story in blue. And this is what we'll be doing next week. But what's going on? This is the blessing of the sons of Jacob as told by according to the documentary hypothesis, by the Judahite Aaronide priesthood. This is the Southern Kingdom story about all of the tribes, including, of course, Judah, which got the big one and the good praiseworthy. The rest of it is the story of the other sons of Jacob who were not Judah. And we got the hint of that at the very beginning when we had to get Judah in charge of everything, even though he was the fourth born. So it started by getting rid of Reuben, Simeon, and Levi so that it came to Judah. Once Judah's done, now we have to take care of everybody else. And while this purports to be Jacob's blessing of the sons, the editor-redactor, the final author of all of these combined stories, says in verse 28, Kol Ela Shivtei Yisrael. These are all now the tribes of Israel. And notice it says Shivtei, not B'nai. So it's the tribes of Israel, not the sons of Israel. Shnei Masar, 12 of them. And then says, V'zot asher diber lahem avihem, v'yevarech otam ish asher kivrachato, beirach otam. Then adds, these are the words, this is the speaking that their father did to them and blessed them, each one according to his own blessing, he blessed them. However, while there are 12 sons of Jacob, and there are 12 tribes of Israel, the list of the 12 on each side don't match. Because remember, the 12 tribes did not include Levi and did not include Joseph, but substituted Ephraim and Manasseh as two separate tribes for the tribes of Israel at the time of the biblical editor, redactor, compiler. The 12 sons do not include Ephraim and Manasseh in the red story. They include them in the blue story, but the 12 sons include Levi and Yosef. So what we're looking at is, according to the later author who put this all together, the blessing of the sons as if the sons and the tribes were exactly the same list. But the recognition by the author is that the tribes and the sons are not the same, but we have a story of the blessing of the so-called 12 sons that is reflective of the blessing or the outcome or the current political, social aspect of the 12 tribes as seen from the Southern Kingdom. And by the time this is all being compiled and edited, the Northern Kingdom, 10 tribes are gone. They've been conquered 200 years earlier by the Assyrians. So this is the red story's blessing of the 12 sons, who are in fact non-existent in their historical reality at the time that it's being written. And they're working from a document of the Southern Kingdom, which we don't know its date at all, because the hypothesis is that this was oral material that was later edited into written material, which was then later taken, the sets of written material, and compiled into one major full document. So when was this poem of Jacob, this blessing of the 12 sons, told? When was it written down? And what was the editor, compiler, redactor doing with the document of the written poem from an earlier date? And if we don't know any of those dates, we don't know what was happening at the time that they were being told. But I think it's pretty clear for all of the book of Genesis that the actual story is not contemporaneous to the subject of the story.
They
So
don't
that,
use the word tribe, do they?
what's
Do they,
that?
do this doesn't include the word tribe itself
It does in the editor statement.
in what we're reading?
No, in next week.
Oh, okay.
In verse 28. That's why the conclusion of all this stuff that we've read, we get a hint at from what the editor says about it, where he says tribes, but the story actually talks about sons. And the story talks about the 12 sons, which includes Joseph and Levi and does not include Ephraim and Manasseh.
Oh,
But by the time it was probably being written down in the southern kingdom, the Ephraim tribe and the Manasseh tribe were in fact up there in the north someplace. And Ephraim was the tonal tribe of the northern kingdom. However, in the southern kingdom, Ephraim and Joseph become synonymous. So the son Joseph is equal to, from the standpoint of the southern kingdom, the tribe Ephraim. And Manasseh sort of gets lost. So, for example, if you're writing a story about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from the standpoint of a Floridian, you will not distinguish between the coastal side of Massachusetts and the Berkshire side of Massachusetts. Although people in Massachusetts know that it's a very different culture between the Boston, Massachusetts, and the Tanglewood, Massachusetts.
Oh, so true.
But a Floridian would not see any difference and therefore would write Massachusetts instead of writing, and Boston said, and Springfield said.
What do you see as the difference between Boston and the Berkshire or the western side of Massachusetts? Curious.
Having worked in Pittsfield for a year and living in Boston, I can tell you one of the most telling differences in a very subtle way was in Pittsfield, Ben and Jerry's closes for the winter.
Oh,
but now Tanglewood, Pittsburgh, there's so many New Yorkers living there, especially
Exactly.
with the COVID, and there's
Yeah, I mean, and
yeah,
Western
but there aren't
Massachusetts
New
is,
Yorkers
yeah,
in Boston.
yeah, but Western Massachusetts is much more a suburb of New York,
oh,
New
that's
York
what,
State.
Yeah.
I mean, people in Pittsfield are closer to Albany than they are to Boston.
except those who are those second homes from Boston.
Yes.
Okay.
What about Northampton? Isn't the colleges there that?
Yeah,
is
well, I
that-
mean, that's, Massachusetts, I mean, you can say there's a difference between the culture of the South Shore and the culture of the North Shore. People in the South Shore, if they're going to go to the North
Yeah,
Shore,
cold.
think they have to book a hotel and pack a lunch. You can't get there from here. So regional distance differences are seen by the region, but are not necessarily seen by people significantly removed from the region.
I don't understand that, Emily. So some of us are less, I might be from Florida then.
I used to
That's
live,
why they had trouble figuring out about Lyme disease, because if you lived in Lyme and had that mysterious disease, you might go to a doctor in New Haven, you might go to a specialist in New York, you might go to a specialist in Hartford, go to a special, and it took somebody figuring out it was the same illness. It was
Yeah.
the doctors they were going to that weren't in the same state, didn't know each other. And so they never, so it took a long time for them to see an epidemic because they all saw a thread. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very much like this.
So yeah, so meanwhile, so this whole thing that we're doing now in the red story is from the standpoint of people down south who are talking about people up north that, to make matters worse, aren't even around very much to defend themselves. So let's move into so therefore we're going to look at it not necessarily from a standpoint of what does it tell us about the northern tribes, but what does it tell us about the Judahite view of the northern tribes, and also being poetic, being material taken from much older oral material. We have to look at it from the standpoint of even wordplay and poetry, not necessarily exact representation of the fate of those sons in the future. So verse 17, so that's why, you can look at the English translation to try to figure out the words if you want, but sometimes it's actually better to look at the big picture of it to see what's talking about and to appreciate it for its poetic impact or its wordplay rather than trying to get caught up in exactly what is it saying, which is also worthwhile. And there are indeed people who try to read this both from the traditional and from the liberal or the form critical version. The traditional, of course, reads it as this is what Jacob said. The form critical, the historical analysis says this is what a later author said that Jacob said, in reflecting on the political reality of the time that it was being written down, putting words back into Jacob's mouth, pulling from perhaps a variety of poetic material from each of the tribes or from some of the tribes, and not having a full extant copy of all of the tribal poetry, sometimes had to say, well, we have to do something with this tribe, so we'll play with them. And we can read it from that standpoint as well. So Yehi Dan Nachash Ale Derech Shefifon Ale Orach Hanoshech Ikve Sus Vayipol Rochvo Achor. From a poetic standpoint, Yehi Dan, and this continues from our statement last week about the tribe of Dan, where the word play was Dan Yadin, Dan will judge. But now, as we have had and will have, we have some animal symbolism. Judah was a lion. Benjamin next week's going to be a wolf. Dan is now a serpent, a snake, a nachash. And Yehi Dan, Dan will be Nachash Ale Derech. And then Dan will be Shefifon Ale Orach. And the word in the middle of those three words, Ale, on both sides, gives us a clue that we're dealing with a little bit of the biblical poetic parallelism. That Nachash Ale Derech is somehow parallel to Shefifon Ale Orach. So Nachash and Shefifon are two words for one thing, and Derech and Orach are two words for the other thing. Nachash Ale Derech, a snake that is on the road, and Shefifon Ale Orach. Shefifon is an adder, a poisonous serpent, and that's on the path. and just paralleling the terms Nachash and Shafifon, and Derech and Orach. Then we get some wordplay, because Nachash, if you switch the sounds around, ends up as Noshech. And you can hear the wordplay of Nachash, Noshech. Noshech is the word bite. And so Nachash and Hanoshech gives us a little bit of wordplay parallelism. And Hanoshech ikve sus, vayipol rochvo achor. Noshech ikve sus is one side of the picture that's being drawn, and Yipol Rochvo Achor is the parallel picture that's being portrayed, that this is a snake, a serpent, a poisonous snake, an adder, an asp, whatever, lying on the coiled up on the roadside, ready to strike, and Noshech ikve sus, and it does, it strikes. It strikes at the ikve sus, literally the heels of the horse. So you're riding along out in the American Southwest, and you hear this rattling sound, and the horse sees the rattlesnake about to strike at its foot, and it rears up, and what happens? Vayipol rochvo achor, his rider falls off the backside. So Hanoshech ikve sus, striking at or biting at the heel of the horse. Vayipol, and falls rochvo, its rider, achor, backwards. So that's the picture that is finalizes the so-called blessing of Dan. Not much of a blessing. Dan is the snake that's causing this stuff to happen, as the guy is simply riding along on his horse.
But that means he's deceptive or strong.
Yes. Yeah, this tiny little coil in the road can fell this big horse and rider. It depends on your viewpoint. If you're the viewpoint of the snake, you really did a major task. If you're the viewpoint of the rider, you're not so happy with it.
Last week, did Don get the property on the sea, along the sea?
No, that was Zavulun.
Oh,
Don was the judge.
he was a judge last week, and this week he's a
He's a snake.
snake. So
Well, you know, the judge strikes at the heel of the bad guys.
We hope so. We hope so.
And then verse 18, verse 18 seems to come out of nowhere. Lishuatcha kiviti Adonai. To your salvation, Yeshua, your salvation, kiviti, I hope or I wait, O God, Adonai. And is this related to the serpent and the striking and the judging, and we're waiting for it to happen? Is this from some other Dan poem that we don't know about, but the the red author put in before we had to put it in the compiler? Is this, if we want to, as we played in the past with Jacob's mind wandering as he's getting a bit old and dim-sighted, that he finishes this part of the blessings and then says, oh my God, I'm waiting for this salvation already. So again, do whatever you want with verse 18, do whatever you want with Don and the serpentness. But time to move on. And verse 19 is the entire blessing of the tribe of Gad, or the son God. Not the son God, but the son God.
what does God mean?
Well, let's take a look at the what the play on the word God is. And you see, God gedud yigudenu v'hu yagud akev. Gedud yigudena Yagud. All plays on the name God. God, you may recall, was named by Leah because now she has or actually named by, I have to go back. I think it may have been Rachel. I have to look and see. I think God is a Rachelian tribe. Rachel says, now I have overcome my sister. I finally got a son.
Oh,
We have to go back and look at their birth names.
through her maidservant then.
Yes, through the maidservant. Yeah, for now we finished the Leah tribes, and we're going to end with the Rachel actual sons. In between, we have some maidservant sons.
I thought Rachel's sons were Benjamin and Joseph.
Yes, but Rachel's maidservant, remember, gave her surrogate sons.
Hmm.
Her sister's ahead of her 4-0. So she can't have any. So she says, take my maidservant, please. And gets 2 more, and she says, I'm catching up. And Leah says, wait a minute, I'm done. So I take my maidservant. I'm getting ahead again. So it was 4-0. Then it was 4-2. Then it was 6-2. Then it's finally 6-4, 8-4. But in any case, God, we don't have anything to say about the tribe God. We don't have any, maybe we don't even have any God tribal poetry extant in the Southern Kingdom where we're working on this material. But we can't leave God out because God is a son. So therefore, we're going to say, God overcoming in overcoming, and he will overcome. And then Akev is, again, from the word for heal or afterwards. We don't have to spend a lot of time dealing with what verse 19 has to deal with, other than look at it as wordplay. And notice Akev is the root name of Papa Yaakov. So verse 19 is somebody's wordplay fun. And it's all we have left of God. Verse 20 is Asher. And Asher only gets 1, but the tribe of Asher apparently did have some awareness or some poem or something that was known to the Southern Kingdom. And so Asher gets actually some parallelism. May Asher, from Asher, so may Asher shmena lachmo, v'hu yitain ma'adanei melech. So the first part, from Asher, shmena lachmo, the fat of the bread, of his bread. So he gets the fat of his bread. And hu yitain ma'adanei melech, and he will give tasty treats of a king.
What's fat of the bread?
Exactly. I mean, the fat is always the best part. The fat, living off the fat of the land. The fat of the milk is the cream that comes to the top. That's the favored part. So I guess he gets the white bread. But again, we read it just from Asher will come now. From Asher is the fat of the bread and the royal delicacies. And the fat of the bread would have been a royal delicacy.
But is that come or give?
Actually, is simply is.
No,
From Asher is.
notain.
No, there's no notain in there. It comes, yes, hu yitan, he will give. But from Asher is the fat of the bread, and then he will give yitain royal delicacies. The delicacies of a king. And then Naphtali gets one verse. And we're back to animals. Naphtali ayala shlucha hanoten imre shafer. And so Naphtali is ayala shlucha, a doe that is sent. And again, hanoten imre shafer, giving out pleasing words. Giving pleasing words. So this is a messenger who doesn't bring bad news, brings good news. Like a doe that has been sent. Perhaps the doe has been sent as the gift, which is not so happy for the doe. But again, reading it just for that. Then the rest now, we're going to be getting Joseph. And the whole blessing of Joseph, remember the northern kingdom, perhaps poetry about Joseph, or perhaps a statement by the southern kingdom about Joseph and Joseph's fate, and the tribe of Ephraim, which is Joseph. But from the southern kingdom, Ephraim is just Joseph. So again, reading this for the language, you're probably better off trying to read an English version of verses 22 to 26 and read it in several different versions. Read perhaps a traditional translation, the Alter translation, the Chabad translation, read some translations, and you'll find that none of them really knows what's going on here. You can read possibly Friedman or somebody's a historical, a biblical analysis of the tribe of Joseph as seen by the southern kingdom. But for now, we're going to look at just some key aspects of this. And 22 to 26 is great reading practice.
Mm.
So, Ben Porat Yosef, Ben Porat Ale Ayin, Banot Sa'ada Ale Shur. And again, our ales give us the idea that we're getting words on either side are parallel. We're getting ben, son, banot, daughters. So we're getting some parallelism of terms and not going to worry about what all of that stuff of fruit and the boughs of trees that are fruiting out. And this is, again, a lot of nature imagery, which parallels the animal nature imagery we were given in the other ones. And then verse 23.
I have a question. I know
Yes.
you want us to look at this in detail, but I was puzzled by the fact that we have Ben Parat twice, but the English has a different translation for that. And
Yes, because I wanted to make it a little bit more poetic. But yes, literally, it's son of fruiting is Joseph, son of fruiting, Ale Ayin on the well. And so if we think about the fruitingness on the well, then it would be the boughs of the trees that have fruited out on the well.
is iron, how do you say wine?
Yayin with a yud.
Oh, I get it. So
Ayin
L.
is the word for an eye, but ayin is also sort of the eye of the ground, the well. If you think about a well, it's an eye of the ground.
Oh, okay.
And then the well and the ayin and the shur, the wall.
But note is daughters, right?
Banot is daughters, yes.
What is there is no daughters in your translation of this?
No, because the like the Ben Porat is that is the fruiting son. Here is the Banot Sa'adah, sort of the fruiting, the daughters of the boughs that are overrunning.
Oh, you mean
So I translate Banot as parallel to Ben Porat. Its daughters, its offspring.
Oh, like how vines kind of
Exactly.
vines.
They're sort of the daughters of the main shoot.
I see. I get it.
So
Okay.
are you saying that the sons and daughters are the fruit?
Yes, the sons are one aspect of the offspring of the main shoot or of the trunk. These are the offspring, the male offspring and the female offspring of the tree. So translated a little bit more poetically. 23 is great for lots of big words with uhus in them, which are always fun. Vayamaruhu, Vayimararuhu, Varobu, Vayishtamuhu, Ba'ale Chitzim. And I think we can read this also for that idea of the wordplay. Vayimararuhu, Varobu, Vayishtamuhu, Ba'ale Chitzim. Whatever that's all about. Verse 24. Vateshav be'etan kashto, vayafozu zroe yadav, midei avir, Yaakov misham roe even Yisrael. We know words in there. We don't know how they fit with anything. But we do know kashto, the keshet, is the bow, like a rainbow is a keshet. And zroe yadav, the offspring, the seed of his hands. And from his hands, avir Yaakov. Now we got Yaakov. Dad is being included in this blessing somehow. Misham roe even Yisrael. And again, notice whenever we have Yaakov in one side and Yisrael on the other side, we're dealing with the parallelism of the poetry. And so midei avir Yaakov, from the hands of avir Yaakov, and misham, from there roe even Yisrael, the shepherd of a stone, the rock shepherd.
I don't understand this English. Can you just say,
That's because I don't understand the Hebrew.
can you paraphrase the English so it makes a little sense?
All right,
Like-
that's
Joseph, who's attacking who?
yes, that's exactly the problem. We don't know what the attack. Yeah, we really don't know in the Hebrew what's going on here. Because Vayimararuhu Varobu is he did it to him, and they did something, Robu, and Vayishtamuhu, and he did it to him again. So whenever we have pronouns in Hebrew, without a clear antecedent, we don't know who's referring to, who's the object and who's the subject. One can ask the questions, is this a fragment of some larger Joseph poem that was known somewhat to the Southern Kingdom, but they only chose to include this part of it? What's this whole thing with Joseph and attacking and archery and firing bows and shooting stuff? And the Red story seems to be very caught up in a little bit of warfare themes, because you will recall in the Red, Jacob said, I took the burial place from the Hittim, from the Hivim, from the Hittites. But in the blue, we're going to go back to my father bought it, my grandfather bought it. So the Red story seems to have a lot of archery stuff, a lot of battle stuff. But we don't have a context, larger context of where this poem came from. But this is a Southern poem. So a lot of it, we just have to read translations who attempt to give us some better sense of what they think was going on. And remember, a lot of translations will be built out of Midrash because the biblical audience in the rabbinic period didn't know all of the older poetry from which this was drawn as well, and so therefore they have to fill in he's and hymns.
So do you think this is about Joseph? Is it about Jacob? Who is this about? And dwelled in who has got the ability with the bow?
Exactly. So is this the Joseph as the heir to Jacob of the northern kingdom? And this is again being put into the mouth of Jacob. And remember, even the southern kingdom story knew that the favored son of Jacob was Joseph. So we're in a sense paralleling Jacob and Joseph and conflating their stories into one story in the mouth of Jacob at the end of his life from the people who were not part of that Joseph tribe anymore.
I mean, we haven't even heard about Joseph as a warrior. He's
Nope.
been a kind of a ruler and a bureaucrat. And
Yeah.
Wise
We
man.
didn't hear very much about Jacob as a warrior.
no, it's weird.
Well, he wrestles.
Yes, he did wrestle with some unknown being.
And he faced his brother coming, right?
And yeah, he does face off against his brother, stumbling and bowing and limping towards him. Not exactly in warrior class. But yes, this whole Joseph thing is Joseph and Jacob, from the mouth of Jacob to Joseph by someone who doesn't like that Joseph was the preferred one of Jacob. So is there any bitterness in the Judah story about Joseph and Jacob in this? And the answer, of course, is we have no idea. So 25, Me'el Avicha. So now we're back to the father of your father, the God of your father. So now this would be Jacob saying to Joseph, my God, but instead of saying my God, says the God of your father. Me'el Avicha ve'azreka ve'et Shaddai yivarechecha birchot shamayim me'al birchot tahom rovetzet tachat birchot Shaddayim varacham. Here we have, in a sense, going back to creation from the God of your father, and Ezer is helper, Vayazreka helps you, and Shaddai, remember El Shaddai was another name of God, so Shaddai Yivaracheka, so the God of your father will help you, and El Shaddai will bless you. And the blessings will be Birchot Shamayim Me'al, the blessings of the heavens from on high, Birchot Tahom Roveset, Tachat. So Tahom, remember, was the deep. The opposite of the heavens was the depths. So blessings from the depths that swarms down below, Me'al above, Tachat below, Birchot Shaddayim Varacham. And now we have the blessings of nurturingness. And notice Shaddayim relates to the word El Shaddai. Shaddayim are breasts, and Rechem is a womb. So this is now the blessings of the true nurturing of motherhood. The nurturing breasts and the nurturing womb. When you leave the womb, you get the breasts. Again, imagery, poetic, parallelism, and no idea historically what it's actually talking about. And once again, possibly being told by the Judah tribe, this blessing of Joseph, the favored son, the northern kingdom, that didn't last as long as the southern kingdom, may be a little bit of polemic or some other kind of statement. And then finally, we're still on the blessings. Birchot avicha gavru al birchot horai ad ta'avat givot olam tihiena lerosh Yosef lekadkod nazir echav. Again, some various kinds of statements about these blessings of your father. Gavru al will be mighty on the birchot of Horai, my parents. And now we have not my fathers, but my parents, Yaakov says.
Their parents,
Horai, Horim are parents, from the word Torah, teachers. Horim umorim, parents and teachers. And then Givaot are hills. And these are Givaot Olam, eternal hills, will be on the head of Joseph. And again, a very strange statement about the crown, Nazir Echav. And Nazir is a term that we really only know from the Nazirite vow. And the only thing we know is the Nazirite was somehow separating himself from his brethren with haircutting and grape and alcohol. Statement that we have no idea what it's talking about. So reading this blessing of Joseph can be read simply for the reading practice, can be read for its poetic and wordplay, or it can be read in various kind of commentaries for later generations who had no idea what this generation was talking about in reference to a previous generation. Next week, getting to the point where we can wrap this all up.
Yay. Yay.
So this is what you're reading next week. One final little
Yeah.
statement about Benjamin, who gets
Okay.
very short shrift. Binyamin ze'ev yitraf, baboker yochal ad, v'la'erev yichalek shalal. And again, we'll see it's much more written for parallelism and animal play. Then, as I pointed out, verse 28 is the bridge that the editor takes from the red story back to the blue story. And to see what came before verse 29, you have to go way back to find out where we left off in the blue blessing of Jacob, remembering that Jacob's blessing in the blue blessing was much more a blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh than it was a blessing of any of the other sons. So we get the blessing of the sons in the red story, but doesn't include Ephraim and Manasseh. We get the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh in the blue story, but doesn't include any of the other sons. And now Jacob is getting ready to kick the bucket.
Oh.
Vayitzav otam, vayomer alehem, ani ne'esaf el ami, kivru oti el avotai, el hama'ara asher bisdei Ephron hachiti. And Jacob is going to take quite a while to die. This is his deathbed statement. Verse 30. Bama'ara asher bisdei hamachpelah, asher al pnei mamre, be'eretz Canaan, asher kana Avraham et hasadeh, me'et Ephron hachiti la'achuzat kaver. Verse 31. Shama kavru et Avraham ve'et Sarah, ishto, Shama kavru et Yitzchak ve'et Rivka ishto, v'shama kavarti et Leah. 32. Mikneh hasadeh v'hama'ara asher bo me'et b'nei chet. 33. Vayechal Yaakov letzavot et banav, vayesav raglav el hamita, vayigva, vayasef el amav.